Well, hello, I'm Dan McTeague, President of Canadians for Affordable Energy, and we have been discussing a lot of policy issues that affect and have ramifications for you as consumers across this country. Over the past few years, it's pretty clear that our concerns are valid, that in fact, the cost of living for Canadians has gone through the roof. And while some try to find external reasons for this, the reality is that our energy sector is in a crisis. It's in a crisis because we have hamstrung our ability to get products like oil and natural gas to markets. There isn't a country around the world today that isn't aware of the fact that Canada, having the third largest provable reserves of those important commodities, has hogtied itself and not allowed itself the ability to get those products to market. And as a result, interloper countries like Russia, like Iran, such as Venezuela and others seem to have the inside track when it comes to being able to provide more energy for a world. But that, of course, comes at a cost. And that brings us to puzzlement as to why the federal government, under the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, Stéphane Guilbeault, would now move to bring about an emissions cap. Now, an emissions cap to reduce greenhouse gases would be fine if it was applied to every industry. But instead, he once again, as his Liberals have done, singled out one industry, the oil and gas sector. He wants that reduced by 40% in the next 7 years. Quite a tall order, considering, of course, no other country is doing this. And given Canada's significant ability to provide more energy to the rest of the world, it is likely to mean and lead to a significant detriment to the Canadian economy. The Montreal Economic Institute has indicated that it could cost the Canadian economy between $40 and $70 billion a year. Now think about that, because the oil and gas sector is the single largest revenue provider for the Canadian government, generating minimally $25 billion a year. How are we going to pay for our hospitals, our education system? How are we going to pay for our roads and our infrastructure? Instead, the federal Liberals seem intent on providing an emissions cap that only applies to the oil and gas sector, will not apply to the cement industry, will certainly not apply to the mining industry, not that it should, but it will certainly not apply to the jet building industry in Montreal. No, these are all sacrosanct, but instead, by attacking the oil and gas sector, you also create another problem, because the oil and gas sector now has to find carbon credits. They will not be available, because it's too narrowly defined. And many of these companies will simply, rather than produce in Canada, will find another jurisdiction to produce. So the Irans, the Venezuelas, the Saudi Arabias, the Nigerias, anyone but Canada tends to win. Why? Because our transparent way in which we provide energy, both in terms of the so-called mandate, the ESG mandate, that would be environmental, social, and governance mandates, are very transparent, and they are among the leading in the world. People know that Canadian energy is clean. It's not perfect, but we have had a good, solid record of reducing our energy and our carbon footprint. Most importantly, we've seen methane and carbon emissions from the oil sector drop about 30% in the past 25 or 30 years. In order for those to continue, you need investments. And if we're going to deprive the oil and gas sector of that, not only is starving the federal government of much needed cash, we're also going to lose the momentum towards important environmental moves like carbon capture. And so for that reason, I think it's clear that consumers, friends who follow us, need to understand how dangerous this policy is. If I look at the net contribution of revenues to the federal government from the oil and gas sector, Canada cannot afford, with a $53 billion deficit in 2023, to lose one penny, much less $40 to $70 billion. The economic consequences are significant, and they will mean a dramatic drawback in social programs in this country. So those of us who value our hospitals, our education system, must be aware that this flight of fantasy towards something that will only push carbon emissions, other countries to produce the same, means that we will achieve absolutely nothing. On a cost-benefit analysis, if you look at it, if oil is not produced in Canada, it will be produced in another country that has absolutely no environmental, much less labor standards. So it's important for Canadians now to have an adult discussion with their members of parliament and tell Stéphane Guilbeault and the Liberals to back off. Otherwise, it will mean the collective undermining, not just of affordability, but the programs that we take very much for granted in this country. It's for that reason that an emissions cap, layered on top of carbon taxes, layered on top of a clean fuel standard, which we've talked about, layered on top of pipeline blockages, layered on top of Bill C-48, C-69, preventing oil from being shipped from other parts of the world, irrelevant pushes towards blocking pipelines in this country. There comes a point at which we have to recognize that the federal government's vendetta against the oil and gas sector is in fact a vendetta against the pocketbooks, the interests of our society, and the Canadian way of life. I'm Dan McTeague, and we'll be back more on emissions caps in the next couple sessions.